everyone, my name is Michelle Thompson and I chose to do my educational giant report on Friedrich Froebel. He was born in Thuringia in 1782 on April 21st. When he was just 9 months old, his mother passed away, but he was with his father of his life, and his father was a pastor. And both of those events and the fact that his father was a pastor greatly influenced his educational philosophy. As a youth, he spent much of his time in the forests, and when he was 15, he was apprenticed to be a forester. And then he did that because he struggled a lot in formal education. And then he was also started to apprentice to be a farmer. Um, So, his educational career, he studied Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, and he was a student of the Pestalozzian system at Yerevan. And following his studies, he became a teacher in Frankfurt, Germany. And as a teacher, what he did, he really believed in nature and involving the students with their learning experience with nature, and that's really influenced by his love of nature as a youth. And so he would take his students out for field trips, and one experience they were to plant a garden and then study that garden and the growth of that garden and how that garden came to be. And so he really thought that nature and education correlated a lot. And he says that cognitive instruction focused on training the senses and academic subjects couched in nature. And so through studying nature, they could come closer to the Creator. And he has another quote that also says, by studying the creation and being creative, one could come into union with the Creator himself. So he was really big in coming to find yourself and coming to know nature, and by doing so, you would come to a closer knowledge of your God. And he would sit in his father's sermons, and so I think that's where he got a lot of his nature of the creation and coming closer with the Creator through different activities. And he really stressed that so that children could know how to become one with the Creator and one with God and really get to know themselves and who they are. So his kindergarten curriculum was based on 3 different things. The first is to create, and through that, children should use shapes and natural elements to create, and children grew in the knowledge of God by participating in creative activity. Just because our God created this world, and so as children create and get to know nature, they get to know the nature of God and the nature of creation and that creation of God. His second is gifts and occupations, and he's most known for those. He had 10 different gifts, and gifts were concrete materials to be observed and manipulated by the children, and those included blocks and tablets, wooden splints, balls on strings. They would observe those, and occupations were manipulative activities that were to be performed by the students, so like paper folding. So, for example, he had blocks, and here's a block of wood, and so he would give the children these gifts, and they would be given the gifts in different stages of development, and they were in these wooden cases with a sliding glass cover, and they would receive these gifts, and they would they would just take the block and look at the block and study the block. And if the child seemed to be not observing the block or was struggling with looking at characteristics of it, the teacher could then ask guiding questions. That's when the teacher would step in and ask leading questions like, okay, well, what are some characteristics of the block? What are its colors? What is its shape? What are the ends like? Are they sharp? Are they dull? So they could then help the children develop deeper cognitive thinking skills. and help the child to then become more observant with life and with nature. And that way, when they do go out into the world, they'll have an easier time than observing others, observing nature, and having deeper critical thinking skills. So, occupations were manipulative activities performed by the students. And so, they would have a piece of paper and they would ask the students to then, like, fold the paper and see what they could do, like what shapes they could make with the paper. And that way they could then perform some more creative activities and having an object and seeing what they could do with that object. Then third, playing contributed to the cognitive and moral development of the children. So as they would play with objects and play with each other, that's how they would develop their cognitive. That's how it contributed to their cognitive development. And then their moral development, because then they're playing with other students, they're playing with other kids their age, and learning to interact with other people while also observing nature and observing how others are performing and things like that. I know from personal experience, I have a math teacher who once we were given these objects. They were shaped like an X and kind of see through a red transparent color. And he told us to just look at the object and to study it, and then as a class we would discuss the different characteristics of that object. So as we would discuss them, we were saying things, it's red, it's transparent, it reflects whatever image is on the solid paper or on a surface. It would reflect that. It would reflect that image. So he had us doing that, and which is very much a Froebelian philosophy of education, because we were observing the object, we were handling it, before we could understand what it actually did. The object was a mirror, and what it's used for is copying angles without making constructions. You can copy the angle by using a mirror. And so by doing that activity, it taught me how I can observe an object and learn from that object without knowing what it is. So I think Froebel's ideas were really strong. He knew he knew what children needed to develop, and he developed his kindergarten through nature. He loved nature, and the word kindergarten in German is Kinder meaning child and Garten meaning garden, and so it's essentially a children's garden. And he believed that children were like flowers and they could grow, and if they were given the proper care for that development. And so as we become teachers and of different subjects, we need to remember that no matter what grade they are in, if it's first grade, kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, or seniors in high school, they still need that care for their cognitive development. And we need to be sensitive to how they're learning, and that's what Froebel believed, is we need to be sensitive to that, because so that they can come to a better understanding of their creator and of nature, and while coming to that understanding, they're developing their cognitive development and moral development. And so I hope you can look at your learning experiences and see maybe how you've seen Froebel's philosophies in your education life, and if you can implement those in your teaching career. Thank you.